Welcome to Jackie's Literary Corner. I am Jackie, and it's time for another 7 on Sunday. So, this week's topic, August 20th, the topic is hardest and heaviest books you've read. And basically the most emotionally and mentally taxing books I've ever read. So, I tried to stick to the books I actually own. But there are at least 2 on here that I don't have physical copies anymore, and I donated them. And there's one on here that is going to be donated soon, but I still have it in the pile of books to be donated, so that was lucky. Okay, so here are the top 7 books that are the hardest and heaviest reads for me. Okay, the first one is one of the ones I don't have anymore, and that is Perfume by Patrick Susskind. This is a German translated work. It's not that long, so I was able to read the whole thing without feeling, I still was disturbed by it, but I was able to, it didn't take me that long to read. So this is about a young man who has no odor of when he's born. I think his name is Jean. It's I think that's his name. But, it's been a while. Like I said, I don't have a copy of the book anymore, but he was born with no odor, no body odor of his own. Even his own birth mother doesn't want him anymore because she is disturbed by him and is afraid of him. Sends him to a church to live, and even the nuns are disturbed the fact that he doesn't have an odor of his own. But he makes up for this lack of body odor by having this amazing sense of smell. He can smell like everything and anything. And as he grows, he becomes obsessed with smell and becomes, enchanted by it. Even the gross stuff, the stuff that we would be like, ew, he is so fascinated by. And after discovering the scent of a young teenage girl, he becomes obsessed with finding the perfect scent of a young girl. So, to the point where he commits murder to get that scent, to capture it. He also becomes a perfumer, hence the title. And what's disturbing about this book is not only has he no odor of himself, but he's also that's not even the worst thing, that he has no body odor. The worst thing is that he's so casual about committing murder, and it's so disturbing how he he treats it like, buying food or something, something he has to do to get this perfect scent. And he is just, in fact, he gets disturbed by humanity and disgusted by them and isolates himself and becomes a hermit, lives out in the middle of nowhere, and he finds a cave. And it's just his journey is so fascinating, and it's kind of creepy. It's a very creepy read. So next is one that I actually have, and that is Misery by Stephen King. And I'm sure you can guess that most of his books, a lot of his books can have disturbing and hard to read elements. In fact, the last book I read by Stephen King had some parts that I was very was getting very angry and emotional, but not in it was a bad thing, but it was one of those things where the characters were acting in a way that I did not, that I was angry about. And I was in either at the community pool or in front of my brother-in-law was around while I was reading, was sitting there, so I was and my nephews were, so it was okay, I'm gonna put this book down and take a break from it. I don't want to I don't want to accidentally vocalize my reaction while I'm reading this book. So I had to put it down a couple times, and it was just, some of it, there were parts that were very hard to read. But I'm going to talk about King's book Misery instead, though, not that one. So This is about a famous writer, Paul Sheldon. He writes pulp fiction type books, thrillers, and stuff that you would. And he writes this one particular historical mystery series, and the main character's name is Misery, and he decides to end the series so he can move on and write other stuff. Well, his biggest fan is Annie Wilkes, and she's not happy about that. She's not happy that he's killing off Misery. And by chance, they end up crossing paths when he's traveling through Colorado and Rockies, and ends up crashing his car in the snow. And she was a former nurse and decides to nurse him back to health. But she decides also that she will not let him go until he writes a Misery novel for her. And so this is just such a disturbing read because this woman is so unstable in the things that she does. And there were moments where I was kind of grossed out by some things, and there was a lot of like icky moments, and just like moments like she breaks his leg. Well, actually, I think she cuts off his foot, but they went a different approach, I believe, in the movie from what I've heard. I have not watched the movie yet, but I would like to at some point. And of course, I heard Kathy Bates does a brilliant job. I mean, she got an Oscar for it, I think. And it's just some of the things that she does, and she gives, and you can tell this woman is unstable, and you just don't trust her, and it feels very claustrophobic, and you just are just praying that Paul escapes this psychopath. And it's also like, it's one of those books that I think writers and will disturb writers and readers alike, because or I should say fans, people that are fans of stuff, of whether it's literature or TV show or movie or music, like a performer, I think, because it's like, how far is too far with your celebrating your fan, you're being a fan of someone? I mean, that this woman takes it way too far. And you just hope most people that are fans of something don't take it to this level that Annie Wilkes does. Even if we don't like where the direction the author, or the creator or whatever goes with their work, let's hope that you have like enough sanity that you won't take it to this extreme and want to punish and force things on, even though we might get emotional on the work that they create. But yeah, I'm just so uncomfortable to read, and just like, but it was so good at the same time. It was just a great story, but it was just like claustrophobic feeling when reading it. And the setting makes it all the more terrifying because it's winter. So it's kind of hard for, even if Paul escapes, it would be kind of hard for him to trek through the snow and without a car. And, like, he might not be able to get his jacket if he tries to escape, because he'll be rushing to get out of there. And this woman, she can snap any minute. Like, anything can push her buttons. She's so unpredictable and terrifying. So yeah, that is Misery by Stephen King. Okay, next is another one I actually have. And that is Anna Karenina. I just read this book earlier this year. I should say I finished it because I started a while back, a couple years ago. But like I said, I have trouble with books this size of committing to them. And I'll put them down for long periods of time and then come back to them. So I don't just do that with series. Sometimes I will do that with books that are just really, really long. Although this is short compared to War and Peace. But this is such a drama. You have our title character, Anna Karenina. She's married to this guy, but she doesn't really love him. They have kids. They have a decent life. but she doesn't. He's kind of cold and very unemotional, and she ends up falling in love with this Count of Vronsky, and they conduct an affair. But then when she gets pregnant, she's forced to tell her husband, and already the public has started to figure out what's going on between Vronsky and Anna, and and she ends up being isolated from the public, and anyone who associates with her in public will be cast out. So it was, and then she slowly loses herself and kind of goes a little, has some mental health problems, and I don't know if it's depression or it might be depression. I don't know. But she starts losing her mind and starts becoming paranoid and not trusting people. And she's just so isolated. It's only her, and she ends up, and her husband, her ex-husband, is like, well, I'm not gonna let you have your child. You can go off, be with your lover, but you don't get the kid. And she starts to even blame Vronsky and her other child, and neglects her other child because her daughter that she has with Vronsky, and it's just seeing her downward spiral is so tragic. And I also got very frustrated with her as a character, but I felt so bad for her, and I pitied her, and was just like, she was just like, she needed help, and Vronsky was not helping. He wasn't doing much to help. He didn't understand it, and he just kind of ignored it. He tried to do what he could, I think, at least. But I think he gave up too quickly. And then the other story of Levin, which is everybody's favorite story, there were aspects that were hard to read, not because they were disturbing or or challenging or dark or anything. It's just, it was of no interest to me, so it was kind of, and that's all the farming stuff, because Levin was a farmer, and all that was a little hard to read because it was just, boring at times, and I didn't care about it, so it was hard in a more, like, okay, I don't want to read this, but I feel like I have to because it's part of the story, and I don't like skipping stuff. But yeah, it was mostly Anna's parts that were hard to read, and were emotional, and very emotional, because you just saw her slowly sinking into, unstable, and being unstable, and you just wanted to, you wanted to help. She needed help, and no one was helping her, not even Vronsky. He was, I think, like I said, I think he tried, but in the end he didn't understand. So, yeah. Okay, so next is, another one that I have is another one I just finished this year that I bought last year, and that is The Weight of Ink by Rachel Kaddish. And first of all, this was such a good book. You like historical fiction. You have kind of two stories going on. The first one is the story of a Professor Helen Watt. She's an elderly woman. She has, I believe, is it not, what is it? It's what Michael J. Fox has. It's with the tremors. I always forget what it's called. Not arthritis. That's I can't remember what it's called, but she's an alien professor, and she's being pressured by the dean of her department to quit or to retire, and she gets a call from one of her former students that in the house that his wife inherited, he found a manuscript written by a Jewish scribe. And he gives it to her, but unfortunately she is not Jewish, and she's also, like I said, she has that disease where you have the tremors. That's gonna pop, either I'm gonna remember in the middle of talking about the other books, or after I'm done filming, I'm gonna remember what that is called. But anyway, And so she ends up hiring this young American student named Erin Levy to work with, to be her assistant. And they don't like each other. They do not get along at all. There's a lot of tension between them, and there's this distrust between the two of them. Meanwhile, the other story is about this young woman named I already forgot her name. What is her name? Esther Velasquez, who is an immigrant from Amsterdam, and she and her brother were taken in by this Jewish rabbi, and after her brother decides he doesn't want to be a scribe for the rabbi, she gets the chance to become a scribe for him and falls in love with it, and she wants to learn, and she loves doing it, but she's also a woman, a Jewish woman, so she's expected to marry and be a housewife and, have children and everything. So not only as a woman is there prejudice, like there's people being like, oh, you got to get married now, you got to be a wife now, you can't be a scribe. Also, there's prejudice because she is Jewish. She is a Jewish girl, and there's people have these horrible thoughts and assumptions about Jews. There's like her love interest and her friend's love interest. They have another friend who's kind of an asshole and very much a jerk to them, and constantly refers to her and her friend as Jewesses. Like that's all they are. That's just what they are to him. And he's like, he thinks she's dumb. He's like surprised that she is like he thinks it's ridiculous that she wants to learn, that she's a learned girl, and that she's a scribe. He thinks, like I said, he thinks she's dumb. He thinks he knows more than her. He's going by what he's told by his own priest, and all these false assumptions about them, that they're greedy, the Jews are greedy, and just pigs, and just when I think he's the pig. And it was just so hard to read those moments when we go into the past, especially when he came onto the scene, when his character appears, and just I want to smack him and punch his face. He was just and it was just so hard. And this was right before the plague hit, so there's a lot of fear of the plague happening. So the parts with Helen were sad, and I felt bad for her at times because of how, her boss is giving her this hard time and passing judgment on her as not just a woman, but an older woman. And seeing and reading the arrogance of Erin was hard. It was a little hard too, but it wasn't as bad as reading. Like, that is just normal, like you get, normal things that are kind of annoying but still good. Still I like reading them. I like reading it, but definitely still had a reaction to it. But it's not as uncomfortable and upsetting as when we go into the past with Esther Velasquez and seeing her parts, and especially with what happens to her brother, because something happens to her brother, and all that stuff was a lot harder to read than this. But this, so this was such a great book, beautifully written. I definitely recommend it, and I like that it was about an aspect of Jewish history that I had not read about, because you hear about the World War II and the whole concentration camps, and yes, that is horrible and important to read about, but sometimes it's kind of nice to read about a different part of their history. Oh, and we also get one story with Helen in her past, and now she meets this man who, when I can't remember what country she was in at the time, but at the time she was just acting out against her parents, and she meets this young man and falls in love with him. He's the head of the tour group that she's part of, and they're helping out. And of course, at first, the Jewish people resent people like Helen helping them, and they also are like, oh, she's trying to hone in on one of our men and trying to steal him from us, because she falls in love with the Jewish guy, and he at one point tries to tell her the wars that they go through, and she's really angry about that, because she's like angry because she feels like he's trying to push her away by like, here's all the bad stuff, do you want to be a part of this, but then she realized later in life that he was showing her this stuff to be like, this is part of who I am. This is part of my identity. Are you ready for this? So that part was a lot hard to read and frustrating to read. But yes, this was really good. Very well written. I really enjoyed it. I hope more people read this because I've only seen one review. Of course, there are probably other reviews. That's the one I read. Okay, next. Okay, so here's the other book I don't have a copy of. And actually, it's another book about the Jewish experience. And in this case, it is about, what happened with the concentration camps. Because this was a book I read for a class. It was actually a graphic novel, which at the time I was surprised by. Because I've only ever read novels. I've never read a graphic novel. But this one is it's not like superheroes or anything like that. It's actually about, like, the Jewish experience. And it's by Art Spiegelman, and it's based on his relationship with his dad. His dad was Jewish, and he was he was in the concentration camps. And you get two storylines. You get him him spending time with his parents, and his relationship with his dad. That storyline, and how, like, his dad's, he doesn't understand and doesn't appreciate his dad as much, and just is tired of constantly hearing all this stuff and dealing with his dad's quirks and behaviors. And his dad's always telling him. And the other story is his dad telling him the stories of his time in the concentration camp. So we get all the flashbacks of his experience there and what they all went through and how that kind of shaped who he is today. And what's unique about this one is it's not just a graphic novel, but it's told through with animals playing the people. Like, the mice are the Jews, and I think cats play the Germans. And you also have dogs, and I can't remember what other animals were used. I know this is actually one of the banned books, which, I mean, come on, they're animals, for crying out loud. You can't. I don't get why that. It's like, oh, are we just gonna sweep that part in history under the rug and not teach people about that part of history because you're uncomfortable with it? Like, all this stuff is just, all the censoring and banning books is ridiculous, I think. And I know I'm not the only one. I hear talk about that discussion all the time. But yes, this was it is a hard read because it is about a time in history where basically Jews were put in, like, prisons in a way, in these concentration camps, and the hard experience of that, the horrors of that, and then it's told in a very unique way, and it's a very, like, it's a hard read, and I think every kid should, when they're old enough, like maybe high school or something, to read this book. And it's a good way to tell about that experience in history, that part of our history, and just, but in a kind of interesting way. Because I want to use the word fun, but I feel like that's not an appropriate word. So interesting is the best word I can come up with, or unique way to tell this part of our history, the story of this experience. And I think this was a way to honor his dad. Art Spiegelman was honoring his father with this graphic novel. Next is the book that has been put in the donation pile, but I still had it. That is the Poppy War trilogy by R.F. Kuang. I haven't read her other books yet, and I'm sure they're going to be just as hard to read because, but this is a fantasy trilogy based on an actual historical event, and that reading about this stuff was just really, like, such a, it's a war book, so there's gruesome, there's some gruesome and gory aspects, but it's also very tragic seeing all these people suffer and seeing the main character Rin have to like put aside feelings and make herself numb, and also seeing her downward spiral and seeing her get drugged up, and it's just the horrors of this war and everything, and seeing her taking these drugs that give her this power, this high, this power, this connection to the gods, and just, and also it's just such a like this whole experience, and knowing that this is based on something that really happened in history is even more challenging and hard to read, because to swallow and to realize that this happened, this was based on something that actually happened. So it was a good series, and the god powers were really cool, but it was also just a lot to read. And I don't think, for some people, I think it didn't help that Rin wasn't always was most of the time a very unlikable person. But I kind of understood where she was coming from, and her anger, her rage, and her being like rationalizing her actions and being like, and being like, these people deserve to suffer. And the tragedy of this threesome relationship of her and these two guys, and just how they were basically on different side, how one of them was on a different side from them, and then the other one was just worried about her losing her humanity in the process and becoming this monster. But yeah, it was really good, but it's also very tragic and just a very hard read. It helps that it was fantasy, though. Like, I love historical fiction, but sometimes, it's easier to read fantasy, even if it's that's based on history, because it's even though that it's based on something that really happened, there's still a separation, because there's fantastical elements that don't, as far as we know, cannot happen in the real world. Like, people cannot be used, there's no, as far, they can't harness God and God magic or anything, God power or anything like that. Okay, so the last one, number 7, is one that I have. It's a horror book by actually Stephen King's son, Joe Hill, and that is Nosferatu. The title's a play on Nosferatu, the vampire that was, from the 1920s film of the same name. You have our main character, our protagonist is Vic, and she, ever since she was a little girl, she's always had this ability to find things, even things that were lost in a completely different place from where she is right now. And it is helped by her having her bike and this bridge that she can cross to get to wherever the object has been left. And one summer she finds out the serial killer who will kidnap kids and torture and kill their parents. And she crosses his path, and that is Charlie Manx. And turns out he's not just a killer, he is an immortal. He is a bit of a vampire-like creature, and he has this car called the Wraith, a 1930s type style car. And he will when he sees that the kids are being treated unfairly by their parents, he will kidnap them, promise to take them to Christmas Land, where they can live forever and do whatever they want. It's basically, Christmas Land is like Pleasure Island, but he steals their life force, steals their essence, and makes them into his little creatures. And he has an assistant, Bing, who will go after the parents. And Vic, like I said, crosses his path as a 12-year-old girl, escapes, pissing off Charlie, and he ends up in a coma. But he wakes. But there is a chance that he's gonna wake up again when she's an adult, and she has forgotten about him. She is married to the young man who saved her, helped rescue her when she was a kid. And actually, to be fair, I think she's a little older than 12. Like, she was like 15 or something when she crossed Charlie's path. I think I would have to double check on how old she is. But he ends up and she ends up getting pregnant with his child. So she has her own kid, and her life has kind of gone in this downward spiral as an adult. And Charlie, like I said, there's a possibility he's going to wake up at some point soon, and Bing is still around, and when he suspects his boss is going to be waking up, he prepares, and Charlie wants revenge, and her child, her son, might be in danger of being taken by Charlie. First of all, the surprising part was it wasn't the part that didn't bother me, the Charlie stuff, actually. I mean, I was definitely worried for her son, and but the parts that bothered me were Bing's parts. What he would do to the parents was so disturbing, so uncomfortable, and scary. Like, this book is very, like, I think, like, horror books don't always scare me, especially, but some of them can, like, and he's just as good as his dad. He's very page-turning, and, with his work of what I've read so far. I've only read 2. I did attempt to read Heart-Shaped Box. I might want to try that again at some point, but, yeah, it was just, Bing's part were just so hard to read, and he was such a little child in the head at one, he was still a child, in a way, Bing was. When, like, a bratty children who didn't realize what he was doing was wrong and monstrous. And just like I said, his parts were the disturbing parts, were the hard parts to read. Surprisingly, because I was used to, like, stuff that Charlie does. I mean, it was still disturbing, but it was like, he's not as scary, I think, as Bing. Especially because Bing is also a human. Charlie is an world creature. He's a vampire type creature. But, and as far as we know, they're not real. Vampires are not real. So, and Bing is a human being. He's a living, breathing human being who was doing these horrible things disturbing things to these people. But yeah, it's still really good. A page turner. I appreciate that the chapter's really short. But it was such a hard book to read, because especially those parts. And you just kept anticipating, okay, is he going to go after Vic again? Is her son in danger? When is he going to wake up and come after her and her son? Like, what's going to happen? Like, it was just, and then also getting the parts, the flashbacks of him going after these people. Like I said, the whole Bing parts. So it was it was a lot. But it was still a really good read. You can see my book's kind of falling apart because I got it wet. So those are the 7 hardest and heaviest books to read. Would love to know what your books that you find the hardest and heaviest books have you read. Please share them in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, click subscribe if you haven't already, click the bell notification button below if you want to be notified about my latest videos, and I will talk to y'all later. Alright, bye!